To the left side.
Hi, Dave Soderberg, Millbury, Massachusetts. How do you decide what to use for social media? Or do you have to use all of it? Or how do you start with that?
Great question. Thank you. Laura?
Probably the most common question that we get, because obviously we're dealing in a lot of different tools. I think it's really important to examine your objectives first and not just run out and go tactic. Oh, give me one of those, get me one of those, get me one of those. Because you could go through and set them all up, and then if they're going to die there and wither on the vine, they're going to put a really bad image of you out there. The number one thing every company should be doing right now, and I mean right now, get out your phone and run a search, is listening. You can listen for months, and that's going to teach you what to do, all right? So I think Mike pointed to something earlier that should be very reassuring to all of you. You already know how to do this because you all already know how to walk into a cocktail party. You do not walk in broadcasting your name and your product. You sidle up to a group, you hear what's going on, you get a feel for what kind of language they're using, what topics they're covering, what their personalities are like, and then you add value to that. So that's all you have to do in social. So I encourage people to start listening first, and then wherever you're hearing signal, and there are many listening tools, there are like 200 of them, I can't even keep track. Where you start hearing lots of signal, that's where to go first. Fish where the fish are. And they might be on Facebook in your industry, they might be on YouTube. You might not have a single customer on Twitter, but it might still be useful to you because it's going to get you to journalists, it's going to get you SEO, it's going to let you do a lot of passive research on trends. I mean, the data flowing through the social web right now, they've figured out there's a financial services specialist tool that has 3 private equity firms as a client in New York. After 19 tweets, they sent out an alert to their financial services clients, we think Osama's been killed. Make market preparations accordingly. That came out a full 18 minutes before anybody else knew. If you don't think that was financially important to them, to have that heads up, something major that affected the global markets the next day was important. So listen first.
Paul, would you like to add to that?
Well, yeah, this is sort of a hot button for me. One of the most common statements I hear is, we have to have a social media strategy. To which I say, well, do you have a hammer strategy? Do you have a copier strategy? Do you have a stapler strategy? No, of course not. Those are tools. Those are tools that you use to help run your business. Nothing different about social media. They're simply a set of tools. You do not need a social media strategy. What you need is what Laura and Mike both referred to. You need social media awareness, but you need to apply the tools strategically, always starting with the business objective. And what are the customers using? Ask the customers, and then use the tools if they make sense to you. If you can count the number of customers on your fingers and toes, and you have you sell products that sell for $100 million like aircraft engines, your social media tool of choice should probably be the golf course. Okay, you do not start with the tool. Start with the business objective.
Excellent. We have another question here on the right side. Yes, sir.
Elliot Tchaikovsky, I'm a vice chair with the IEEE Computer Society. How do we handle some of the downside of misinformation, which can go around the world faster than the right information or the true information? And is this really a 1984 end of privacy as well?
Who wants to respond to that one?
It's 2 big questions.
That is a big question.
I guess I'll start. I mean, I think that you see this a lot in people's criticism of like a tool like Wikipedia, where, okay, so we're going to build an encyclopedia where anyone can go say whatever the heck they want. How can that be a supplier of good information? At the end of the day, it doesn't come from an authoritative source. And I think that what actually happens inside these systems is that the delivery of information is no longer a sort of static process where information gets published on the web in any of these media and just sort of sits there, sort of uncommented upon. If you think of these systems as sort of dynamic, if you think of them as answer, question, response kind of systems, what I found is that disinformation, faulty information, rarely survives long enough to really do harm in the world. That particularly if something is big and important and visible, if someone makes a claim that turns out to be false, they're going to have 10 people on them in very short order, call them on that false claim. And so paying attention to these things and viewing them as a story that unfolds over time, as opposed to necessarily just an event, just a sort of content asset that lives on the web forever, I think that's a new way of thinking and consuming media that a lot of people understandably need to get used to.
Excellent. Okay, we have another question.
There was a second question there about privacy, too,
Okay, go ahead.
which I don't know if anyone wants to address that.
Well, yes and no, right? So when we lived in tiny communities, you didn't have privacy then either, right? And you got used to that, and people knew your stuff. And there were really bad parts of that, and there were really amazing parts of that in terms of accountability and behavior. Great article, I think it was in the New York Times a couple of days ago, about the crowdsourced identification of strangers in photos. Like, there was one World War II reporter, and then there was the couple kissing during the post-hockey riots. Like, anonymity is pretty much gone because we've gone back to an older model of privacy, which is community accountability, and we've done that on a massive scale. Now, there are really, really major downsides to that as well, but I don't think complaining about them is going to do anything. I think you just need to recalibrate and understand you do live in a very small town again, and you are going to have to own your words, and you are going to have to own your behavior, and you may have to own it for quite a long time. I think there's a lot of refreshing things in that. I think we've always known that, I will call out politicians, that many people in power have their sort of things they do behind the scenes and get away with, and I think everybody knew about JFK and lots of women, right? But no one said it. Now it's going to be front and center, and it's going to be something you have to own and deal with, and I think it's healthy that we acknowledge we all kind of have monsters in each other, and we all have character flaws, and we can work together to support each other through them.
Laura, you mentioned earlier when we were speaking that one of the real issues that businesses face is similar to a cooking show. And I wanted you to talk about that because I think it addresses first some of the questions we've already had, and that is, where do you start and how do you keep it going and how do you stay organized?
Sure. So I was a cook when I was on the schooner, and there's a concept called mise en place, which is you get all the ingredients together, you get them all prepped, and that makes the cooking much easier. So, we've all watched cooking shows, and we kind of hate on the chef because we're like, yeah, I don't have someone to serve that all up for me and make it that easy. And so Anthony's being very kind and giving me a huge chance to pitch the product we launched a week ago. We launched something called Social Base because we realized the problem wasn't so much, run, tactic. It was, let's keep it all organized. Let's get it all in one place. So what we did was realize, if you're using 8 different tools and you have 7 different team members contributing, and only one of them is really expert in social media to begin with, you need a space to organize it. So we have a clean little task list of daily things you need to do, and each one's assigned to a tool. So maybe it's, launch this and go check on our scavenger campaign. Launch this and go look at our metrics once a week. Launch this and pull the report that you need to send in quarterly. And you can assign it to all the different team members who maybe aren't nearly as expert in social as you, the social media expert, or as, in many cases, it's an agency trying to help a company execute on their own, under their own steam.
Seth, I wanted to ask you a question, and that is about the companies that you enlist in Scavenger. Do you see any reluctance from some companies giving up their privacy or being somewhat reluctant in being part of that game that sometimes they may lose control of?
So there definitely is some pushback, especially we've seen from from brands that are a bit more old school, that are a bit more used to a historical method of communicating with customers. And one of the interesting things that we've seen is that rather than Scavenger feeling like a loss of control and feeling like what a lot of social media feels like, where you start a conversation but can't really control it, because of the way that it's structured, it actually offers one of the best opportunities to control conversation. Of course, with social media, you can never control a conversation, but you can start it off with a question, with an interesting statement, with something that drives it in the right direction. And so one campaign, again, just picking a large recognizable brand is 7-Eleven that we recently launched with the, I don't know if anyone here has seen Hangover 2, very funny movie, targeted to sort of.
I actually saw that, yes.
Good. So there, they have people checking in at 7-Elevens on Scavenger all the time, and what they said is, for this, we're going to create our own challenges, which are, asking, what are your top 3 cures that you can find on the shelves of 7-Eleven for a hangover? Right? And so instead of people saying totally unscripted, unstructured things about 7-Eleven when they went there, they had very, very funny, really clever answers that were going out onto Facebook, going out onto Twitter, existing within Scavenger, that were answering a specific question. There, by the way, the number one answer that came out was dignity. But you can't find it on the shelves of 7-Eleven. I thought that was pretty good. So and of course you can't always control the conversation, but people also said aspirin and all sorts of other fun things, and that's a very specific and kind of humorous example. But the message that it speaks to is that with some of the more the newer tools that are out there, you can invite people into your bicycle shop and not just have them check in and not just have them say something on Twitter, but ask them, snap a picture of if you could bring any bike home with you today, what would it be? And snap a picture of it. And when people share that out to their friends on Facebook and on Twitter, that's a really interesting piece of content. It gets liked, it gets commented on, it gets retweeted, and you can never control the conversation, but you can work to start it off in a way that's likely to be good.
Okay, what happens when it takes a negative turn, a deeply negative turn that obviously does not help your client?
Right. So it does happen, and it sometimes happens within Scavenger, where Scavenger offers a lot of controls to the business to be able to control what their stream looks like and control what challenges are created and create rewards and all sorts of things like that. But often it happens outside of the ecosystem on Facebook and Twitter, where you really can't do anything, or you can't do anything to clamp it down. And the right thing to do then there is to look at what's been said and to respond appropriately. And there's a mixture there where sometimes someone says something like, oh, I had a terrible sandwich today. And you want to respond back and say something like, oh, I'm really sorry you had a bad sandwich. Come back, tell us how we can improve. Let us try and make the situation better. And people respond very well to that. On the flip side, there are some comments you just shouldn't respond to. Sometimes people are just angry, and they're what we call in the internet world the trolls. And rule number one is you must never feed the trolls because they're very, very hungry.
They keep coming back.
And so when that happens, you want to make a decision between, hey, this is a person where maybe they didn't have a great experience and I can reach out and make it better and respond with a very human tone. And sometimes, as hard as it is, you just have to let it lie because going after it actually stokes it a lot more than it's worth.
There is so much upside in losing control and negative feedback. Like if you're walking around with spinach in your teeth and your fly open, do you not want someone to tell you so you can fix it? Right?
I've never heard that analogy used before.
I was thinking about it while he's talking. I'm
should we all take a moment to
you
check?
You need to know what's wrong or you can't address it. If you don't know what's wrong, you can't address it. And by the way, don't feed the trolls, but sprinkle a little pixie dust in their direction because it makes you look really good. If you are nice to someone who is full on being a jerk, people love you and they rally to your defense. So seriously, look at it as a chance to find out what you're not doing right, what people really do want, how people really do feel, how you can improve your company. I mean, it's valuable data. Don't run from it. You've already lost control. They're already going to go off if they want to go off. It has nothing to do with whether or not you run a scavenger game or whether or not you have comments on your blog.